What's going on, reefers? Blaine here. In today's video, we get the opportunity to see a reef that's been up and running for almost 20 years. Our New York Tank Tour series is up and continuing, and today we're going to be checking out Joe Tusi's unbelievable reef system. Let's dive in. Reefers, we are here with Joe Tusi. Joe, thank you so much for having us here.
Thank you for coming.
Man. This is amazing. I've been wanting to see this tank for so long. We've talked about it. We met up at Aquashella. We shared a couple drinks, and the last thing I said to you before I left was, I have to see this reef tank. We've talked about it off camera. You said this is a 17-year-old system, correct?
Yes.
So this has seen so many different styles, generations, and different tanks. When this was put in, originally, what was the plan with it? When you got it set up, and you said you do some resets throughout the years?
Yes, I mean, believe it or not, when I installed this tank, I didn't install this tank. I hired somebody to install this tank. I didn't know nothing about the hobby, believe it or not. I mean,
crazy for you.
Not that I know too much today, but I didn't know anything. I was basically, I paid someone to install it, customize it, build it. It's a custom tank, closed loop and all of that. It was done by a company in Texas. I had to learn pretty quickly because it was costing me a lot of money every week. So that's how I got into the hobby, and I started to learn, and obviously I learned from other reefers, you know, research and so on and so forth. Then yeah, as I succeeded through the years, obviously it was an LPS tank mostly, and that's why I did the closed loop, because like I said in other conversations, is that I didn't want power heads showing, this, that, and the other. I wanted to clean look. But then I switched to SPSs, and you need flow.
You definitely do.
The closed loop is not enough.
I love the corals you've selected. You've got so many nice SPS, but in the mix of it all, right, it is mainly SPS, but you have a mixed reef in a way. You got some Gorgonians, you got LPS. Was SPS always the goal when you were looking at getting the tank rolling?
No, originally it was all LPS, and then I switched over to SPS because I felt that it's more delicate, more complicated, more challenging to grow SPSs versus growing LPS, and that's why I went that route. And then, you know, I guess I succeeded too much because I gotta do it every 2 years, where I gotta like reboot it, where I take everything out, set up my whole office with tubs, lights, skimmers, like another system by itself, where while I'm doing the tank, the animals are a lot, you know, happy and living. And not being, you know, so stressed. And like you see, it's time again, you know, where a lot of this stuff is frags that in 2 years, they're just out of control.
It's so funny too, because earlier we were all sitting here, we were gawking over your tank, and you were complaining, right? You were saying that, oh man, this and that. I always say the grass is greener, right? Everybody looks at their system and sees all the things wrong with it. And all of us here, me, Kevin, Garrett, everybody's looking at this tank and we're like, what is actually wrong with it, right? I love your fish in here. You've got an amazing selection of fish.
The blue tank actually is the oldest tank in this tank. That was purchased to me by my son when I started out. My uncle passed away and I was distraught, and he says, come on Dad, let's go for a ride. And he took me to a pet store and he bought me that and a purple tank. The purple tank is not here for a reason, and that reason is when the black tank showed up. They didn't get along. So one had to go.
Right.
And obviously it was going to be the purple tank.
Yeah, I gotta keep the black tank.
I love fish. And we had this conversation earlier on, what do you like more, corals or fish? Most of the time I would probably tell you fish, because I do like fish, especially rare fish, which more challenging if it's the Femininus wrasse, getting him to eat, if it's the Lenardi. Don't ask me how many I bought to have the one that are in my tank. So fish could be also very challenging, as the same thing as an acro being challenging. And that brings the inner part of you of how in depth you want to be in the hobby, how you want to succeed, right? It's not about having a tank. Are you being successful having a tank? If it's a fish or a coral, it doesn't matter. It relates to both. To me, it's all in relation. So if you're gonna have a good tank, you're only allowed to have 20, 30 fish. Be selective. That's basically where it came down to selecting specific fish, is that once you reach that quota, the more you put in there, obviously you have bigger problems to control your nutrients and other things, right? So you want to have that balance, and that's why I came with that decision of choosing the best I could do at the time and afford at the time. But it's time, like I said, it's time to reboot it, because, as I was saying earlier, I mean, to get your hands into this side of the tank, you have to remove half the corals.
Yeah, I mean, all the corals are basically on the glass at this point.
Yeah, and as you can see, that's why you see a lot of fresh glue here and there, is because I had to remove corals,
right,
to get, to fix a coral. Or like I have this coral here who got stung by this chalice, and I would love to get in there and clip it off so I don't have to look at it like that. But I can't reach it.
I got so excited about talking about the livestock right away. What's the size of this tank? How big is this tank? What's the dimensions on it?
It's a 180 custom. It's 60 inches long, 22 or 23 inches tall, and I believe it's 24 inches deep.
And then for equipment on here, I see the MP series you got running for flow. What else are you doing for equipment on here, lighting wise, things like that inside the tank?
So basically I have 2 MP40s there. I got Tusis on this side, 1 here and 2 on the other side. It's a closed loop system, so as you can see, these pipes down here, they're pushing flow up from the bottom. I have a Reef flow pump in the other side where the water goes down into the sump, and then from the sump is taken out to the chiller and brought back. So it keeps the water chills, because I'm running metal halides, T5s, and some Reef Bright LED strips, to give that blue pop.
And then down below in the sump, what kind of mechanical filtration are you running down there?
It's a simple system. It's basically a custom reactor, a good skimmer, a Bubble King skimmer, and then I have a kalkwasser reactor, which I dose kalkwasser in the system to keep my pH up. As you know, we're in the basement.
Right.
And I do have the zeolite reactor, to help with bacteria and stuff like that. And the rest is a sock,
You like to keep it simple, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about it while we were enjoying dinner. You talked about the idea of adding in corals, then adding in fish, adding in corals, adding in fish, kind of that natural method of keeping things stable. This tank is obviously showing that. A lot of these corals are old, huh? We've got some bird's nests in here. You said that's probably around 17 years old at this point.
These bird's nests, for example, they were purchased as a frag from ORA when I started out. I mean, think about it. 17 years ago, there were very limited Teniuses. These corals keep, like, from a frag, I keep, like, bringing them back for 17 years. I like the old corals. Today, obviously, we have a lot more available to us. And obviously, that's what made this hobby even bigger and greater, because there's so more available to us. We know so much more colors, husbandry, keeping them, and so on and so forth. But yeah, I mean, the old OGs will always be the old OGs.
The OGs will be king, right?
Like
Reigning
the old OGs will always be.
When you're talking about some of your numbers in the tank, are you striving for certain numbers in the system? You looking for stability? What are you looking for on your main parameters?
Stability. Stability is the key. Whatever parameter you choose to stick with, your corals will adjust to it. You know, it takes time to some corals more than others, but stability is the key. You want to stay at 70 kh? God bless you. You know, stay with it. But a guy that's keeping it at 9, he's doing nothing wrong, in my opinion. I keep mine at 8, 8.5 DKH, 420, 440 calcium, you know, around 1400 in magnesium, and I like to be in those areas as stable as I can. Other than that, the hobby is a very simple hobby. I feel that we complicate it.
For sure. What about your nitrate levels? Are you looking to, what kind of numbers are you looking for nitrates on here?
I like him to be at about 5 ppm nitrates,
Okay.
between 5 and 10, let's put it that way.
Okay.
But the key is that I like 100 to 1, where if my nitrates are at 5, I like my phosphates to be at 0.05, not 0.10, you know, an imbalance of 200 to 1 at that point. The best numbers for color and growth that I experience in this tank is 0.05 phosphates to 5 nitrates. Someone else will have the same success at higher or lower. The thing that I always said about numbers that we read is basically we're reading what's left over, you know, in the water. So the higher the numbers are, the dirtier the water is, in a sense. Mm-hmm. But your corals are not going to consume more than they're already consuming every day. That's how I reef. Again, no one is going to agree with me. Everybody going to be agreeing with what my method is, but it works for me.
I was about to say, you know, everyone has their own reefing method.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, every tank's going to be different. Even when you look inside and you got your other tanks in the room over here, those tanks are different too if they're not tied together, right? They're going to be completely different.
Exactly.
You've got some utilitarian fish, right? You got some file fish in here. You've got some wrasses. I'm looking at your cleanup crew. What are you doing for cleanup crew in this tank?
I do have a 17-year-old sand bed that everybody is afraid of.
Same sand. It's been the same sand
bed. I never changed
So
it.
when you're pulling all that corals out, the rockscape stays, right, and the sand stays.
I never vacuumed my sand bed in 17 years. And then you read about the old tank syndrome. You read about this, that, and the other. I always believed in nature. We don't go and vacuum sand beds in the ocean. We don't medicate the ocean. We don't do anything to the ocean, right? Except pollute it,
right?
In a sense, mm-hmm. Right? So I always looked at reefing in a natural way. So I have Nassara snails 1 per gallon. So there's 180 to, you know, an average of 200 Nassara snails hidden in the sand, but that they will come out at night and turn it over and mm-hmm. this and the other. And I always kept that from day one because somebody told me that. And I spend a lot of money every year. I probably, in a small 180 gallon tank like this, I probably spend about, I would say $1,500 to $2,000, which is a lot of money in inverts. Mm-hmm. Right? Now we spend $2,000 in corals right. or fish right. that we're enjoying every day.
Yeah. We don't
look at it like it's a lot of money, but for inverts it's a lot of money. So that's one thing. The rest is hermit crabs, you know, conches, you know, and things like that. Nothing more, you know, special. But the key to a guy that have a sand bed is this Nassara snails, in my opinion. Every now and then, basically, you know, I clean up all like broken branches of corals. Every now and then I go in there and siphon that because I don't want to look at it. I want to see a nice white sand bed.
You took the words out of my mouth. We're kind of part of the cleanup crew, right? Like, we are one of the cleaners in this tank. When you're talking about your maintenance, right, you talked about, kind of cleaning up your sand bed, tidying it up. What other things are you doing? You mentioned you do automatic water changes. What other kind of maintenance and dosing are you doing for this tank here?
Basically, I dose trace elements every day, which I use the Tropic Marine A and K. I do carbon dose, to maintain my nutrients because I don't want to use GFOs. I don't use carbon. I truly believe that they remove a lot of trace elements. So you're trying to clarify the water and you're removing trace elements. With GFOs, when I was doing GFO and carbon dosing, I had a lot of issues with RTN. I did put in an algae reactor and I dose iron every day, iron and manganese every day. And I was able to maintain the nutrients that way. My nutrients are intact without using GFOs and carbon. And I was very happy with that because I used to hate going to clean that GFO. And
yeah.
Just like, especially in the wintertime.
Right.
You can't clean that in the sink. The orange and the rust. So that's how I got over that.
What are you feeding the tank? What do you got going on for feeding for your fish, and then for your corals? Are you just actively letting the fish be the feeding for them? Fish poop being the food, or
basically,
what are you feeding?
I like to make a mix of all frozen food. I don't feed dry food. I don't feed pellets or flakes or anything like that. Which, by the way, it does have a lot. I'm not gonna say negative effects, but they do. The dry forms carry a lot more stuff than as what people used to think frozen foods do. I do feed a lot of small particulates, if it's cyclops, if it's all of that in a frozen mix. Feed the fish, feed everything.
Right.
That's basically, every now and then I do oyster feed liquid, at night. And that's basically it. I've never spot fed corals or particulates, like these reef roids and things like that. I did receive some Benets foods that I've been testing, because some of it's supposed to remove, let's say, your nutrients.
Yeah.
So I've been doing that, behind the scenes kind of a thing. But I have not seen any effects yet. Again, don't forget the 17-year-old tank.
For sure.
So, lowering levels in a tank like this could be a little bit more challenging than in a newer tank.
Absolutely. We utilize Benepets a lot at the farm. We are mixing it in kind of our coral cocktail that we feed all of the systems. We like to use both Reefroids and Benepets kind of as a tool in our tool belt. We have a multi-tool belt when it comes to the farm. Kevin and the whole team have all kinds of different ways they can, change and alter the levels to get to the right stability we're looking for. And we've seen that Benepets has been really beneficial to be able to still feed the system and not kind of bump up those phosphates and nutrients. So it's been really nice to have Benepets in our tool belt and to utilize them, with our live phytoplankton and things like that. We talked about the fact this is a 17-year-old tank, right? This has seen a lot of time, right? This is an old system. Have you, throughout the course of time, obviously you've been reefing for a couple of years now, with it being 17 years old. What have been some of the biggest trials and tribulations, the things you've some of the hardest things you've worked through to be able to get to the point where you have a tank like this? And I know you look at this tank and you see the little tiny details that aren't going so great, but when everyone's going to see this tank on camera, they're going to be blown away. It's amazing. Right. So what have you kind of gone through to be able to get to this point where you do have this forest of corals?
Never had serious issues about growing corals. The biggest issues I've had through the years is really like a bobbit worm in a tank, taking it apart to catch him, and things like that. Maybe 2 years ago, I almost crashed it by, even though, as they say, newbies, mistakes happen to all of us, regardless how long you've been in the hobby, because it's always come to a time where you're under distress of something, family matter.
Right.
My GHL computer decided to crap out. So now I'm switching over everything to Neptune, and I had dozers on the GHL, which now I don't have dozers on the Neptune, and I was telling my kids to dose this, and this, and I forgot that I was carbon dosing. So I came back, and my nutrient levels were through the roof, corals were stressed out, and then, to top it off, as soon as I came back, my chiller outside crapped out. So now I have...
When it rains, it pours.
Yes. So then now I have corals that are stressed out, temperature rising, coral dying and bloom and losing fish. I come down here, the tank is white as a cloud. I thought I was losing everything. And how I saved it, I'll be honest with you, I have no idea, because I thought I lost. So those are the problematic things in terms of like the 17 years that I had. Everything else, I never had cyanobacteria, I never had hairology, I never had to deal with things like that. You mentioned the filefish earlier on. I do have one pest, which is the Mijano. And that's why I have the filefish, and he keeps them in check. He keeps them clean.
You mentioned doing resets, right? So we're looking at this tank. We talked about it at dinner. You said maybe species specific. What are you thinking about for maybe the next run of the Tusi Reef? What's going to be the next kind of generation of this system?
I've been thinking about doing one species possibly, besides Bursness and stuff like that. If it's all Teniuses, or all smooth skins. I always had that dream of, I love smooth skins, cause if it's grannies, if it's anything that's smooth. Where I was thinking of like, how about having a tank only smooth skins? And that's what I've been thinking about, because they maybe grow a little slower, which will give me a little bit more time, that I don't have to do this every so often. And it keeps it more open. I'm getting a little tired of this congestion of corals and of things killing each other.
The forest of corals.
The forest of corals. So I've done it, I passed it, something new that I haven't done. So that's what I've been thinking, is like, if it's just grannies and maybe speciosas, red dragons, orange dragons, and things like that.
It's always fun, I get to do these tank tours, and I get to come into people's homes. I get to, get in tune with you guys, get in tune with your tanks, and everyone has a different way to reef. And recently I did a tank tour where the moonshiner method was his way, and he loved it. And for you, the old school reefing method is what you like and what works. And it's kind of one of those things like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Exactly. And again, I have nothing against people who are doing that.
Absolutely.
You know what? But what I'm trying to say is that you could be successful in many different ways. And people used to say, oh, you have a salt water tank? Oh my God, that's so hard. It's not. It's really not. It's find a method, find a way that you're comfortable with, but stick with it. Don't look at me because I'm doing this. Now you're gonna change what you're doing to do what I'm doing, because that could be your downfall, and vice versa. You know what I mean? It's find a method, but again, the key to what you said, Blaine, is stability.
Absolutely.
No matter what you do.
Right.
It's stability.
And time helps too, right? I mean, you've had so much time for this tank to truly mature, right? Like, you look at a lot of tanks and people are like, oh, my tank's getting mature, right? And it's a year old. It's a year and a half old, right? Like, that's truly not mature in the grand scheme of things. I think of the OG SPS display tank we have in the farm, and that's nearing almost 10 years at this point. This tank is almost double that. Like we have a microbiome that's truly as diverse as it possibly can be, and that's something that I think is a great attest to why this tank is doing so well.
It's all in a balance, and a mature tank, from initial to cycling, because people think once the tank is cycled, you're good. Yes, you are, to a point, but you have a resaturation. There's so many things to come that I always said a tank will mature minimum 2 to 3 years in, where you reach saturation everywhere. If you have a sand bed, if you don't have a sand bed, if you have live rock, if you have a fake rock, if you have a concrete rock. We used to have one fake rock, now we have 20. You know what I mean? So there's so many things that are changing, and everything is different. But yeah, it takes a long time. I would say it would 2 to 3 years to tank to be 100% mature, 100% stable if you choose to keep it stable. If you don't start changing things between, because Kevin's way is better, or Joe's way is better, or Blaine's way is better, just do your research. Like a tank, there's plenty of reefers like myself who are very successful, beautiful tanks. Do what he does, stick with it. If it's the moonshiner, not the moonshiner, and choose a good salt and stick with it. And don't start changing because, oh, I'm gonna change my salt, because that could even be a difference.
What salt are you running on this tank? You just mentioned salt, picking the right kind of salt. What salt are you currently running right now?
I was using the Tropic Marine, and I am contemplating starting to switch slowly to possibly to Nios. Why? Because Tropic Marine is very high on manganese and low on other things, and I want to try to find a salt that's more stable across the board, because the precipitation of manganese obviously precipitates other elements with it. So that's where I'm at. But for the majority of all my success have been Tropic Marine Pro.
At the end of these interviews, I always like to ask, whoever I'm interviewing, their biggest piece of advice for any reef keeper. If you guys haven't been paying attention in the video already, I'm gonna let you know there's a lot of nuggets of advice throughout the course of this video. But if you had to pick one solid piece of advice that you'd give anyone either joining into the hobby, that's been in the hobby, what would you give those people? Jake Adams always did it whenever he did a tank tour, and I'm trying to take that and kind of carry on that tradition of grabbing all these pieces of information from all of these reefers across the country, right? We all have different systems, right? You've got a 17-year-old tank. I talked about it with someone the other day. They had a 1-year-old tank. They had a piece of advice, they wanted to give. I want to hear from you, with all your years of experience, what you would say.
It's really simple piece of advice. You are luckier than I was 17 years ago today, that there's so much more write-ups. You mentioned, rest in peace, Jake Adams, right? 17 years ago was not the same Jake Adams as 17 years later,
Absolutely.
Right? He was still learning. He was still exploring.
For sure.
He was still bringing us all the education that he researched on his own, and travelings that he did. You have a lot of information out there. Keep it simple. Choose one, and you're gonna be fine. Choose a successful one. I don't believe that there is one better than the other. I really don't. But stability, again, that word continues to come back, is the key.
I feel like every time I get into the farm, I start to get a little, I feel like I'm making these videos for everyone at home, right? This is a passion of mine, but I'm a reefer at heart, right? So I get this opportunity to sit down with you, sit down with Kevin, do these videos in the farm, do these videos here, and of course I'm making it for everyone at home, but I am sponging all of this information in at all the time. And so, Joe, I just want to say thank you so much again.
No, you're very welcome.
This has been so much fun. Thank
No,
you for the
thank
Chinese
you.
food, for the
stop.
beer, for all the things. This has been a blast. Your tank is absolutely amazing. To be able to
Thank
see it in
you.
person is great. I can't wait to come back again once you end up going with that next generation of the tank. Maybe it'll be 20 years at that point. Who knows? But
Well, maybe I'll be closer to you, which will be a different tank and much bigger.
that would be even easier
know,
for me. Not nearly as long of a travel. It might be a little warmer. Who knows, right?
Right.
Well, if you guys have watched all the way through this video, I want to say thank you so much for tuning in, checking it out, and hanging out with you guys, you know, just doing this reefing thing. If you guys haven't done so already, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell notification so you don't miss out on any future uploads.
Thanks.